Good afternoon, everyone. As chair of the governing board, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the Psychonomic Society's third international conference. I'm truly excited that some of the field's most distinguished senior scientists, innovative early career investigators, and creative graduate students will be gathered here over the next few days to discover, discuss, and debate ideas in cognitive psychology. These meetings are just one of the many ways Psychonomic Society works to strengthen and increase the ties and collaborations among cognitive psychologists around the world. So it's only fitting that we're here together in this world-class city of Amsterdam, which from its earliest days has been a bustling hub of commerce that welcomed other cultures with open arms. My first visit to Amsterdam was about 13 years ago, 2005, and I've always been psyched to return because Amsterdam has so much to offer. From its elaborate canal system, architecture, the Van Gogh Museum, the tulips are out in Keukenhof Gardens. There's so many things to explore and do, and I hope you'll take a chance over the next couple days to get to know Amsterdam a bit better. This magnificent venue for our conference is on the site of the original Dutch stock exchange that was built in 1611. If you take the safe route like me, you'll just call it the BVB, but for you non-Dutch speakers, I think it's the Beurs van Berlage. I'm going to stick with BVB, I think. Worldwide trade came through the BVB for decades, and for the next couple of days, research ideas will be traded and shared from scholars all around the world. I'm sure this conference is going to be stimulating because only the preeminent Society for the Experimental Study of Cognition could bring together nearly 700 of the most innovative researchers from more than 35 countries. But Psychonomics does a great deal more than just put on these conferences, and I'd like to briefly highlight some of the Society's recent accomplishments. Working closely with our publisher Springer, our journals are publishing cognitive psychology's best research with insights to the fundamental properties of how the mind works. Our 7 journals are having a major impact. In just 1 year, there have been over 3 million articles downloaded. That's just 1 year, okay? So please, continue sending your best work to our journals. Your work will have an impact if you come to us. In addition to the excellent science in every issue, our editors have been hard at work at developing new special issues. And at least in my own experience, this is anecdotal and non-scientific, but I found when I publish in special issues, my work gets more exposure and has a higher impact. So I want you to consider submitting some of your articles here, so I'm going to mention some of the special issues that are now underway. We're taking submissions in memory and cognition for a special issue on human memory, a proposed system and control processes, which commemorates the 50th anniversary of Atkinson and Shiffrin's seminal article. Attention, Perception, and Psychophysics is accepting papers for 3 special issues. AP&P is an overachieving journal at this point, so they're getting papers right now for perceptual cognitive constraints on the structure of speech communication in honor of Randy Deal, a special issue in honor of the contributions of Anne Treisman, and another on time for action, reaching for a better understanding of the dynamics of cognition. The journal Cognitive, Affective, and Behavioral Neuroscience is accepting submissions for a special issue on reward systems, cognition and emotion, and Cognitive Researcher, Principles and Implications, has a call for papers now on a special issue on deception detection. Those are just some of the special issues that are now underway that I want you to consider sending your work to. And if you're interested in more of our special issues that have already been published, please visit psychonomic.org. The Leading Edge Workshop program, which is one of our newest international initiatives, has been gaining a great deal of momentum. This program has a year-long focus that starts with a workshop that is generously funded by the Society. That workshop then becomes a special symposium at the annual meeting, and the organizers hold a call for papers for a special issue in one of our journals. As it happens, this year's workshop on the time for action, reaching for a better understanding of the dynamics of cognition, was held over the last 2 days in Amsterdam, and much thanks to the supports from Brown University. And because of them, it was the Psychonomic Society's first webcast. So those who could not attend the event could watch it live and even ask questions in real time. And I think there are about 125 members who kind of logged in remotely. So we're really proud and excited about that initiative. Another initiative that strengthens international communication is the annual Collaborative Symposium. This is also funded by the Society, and it is jointly organized with another international society and held at that society's annual meeting. I'm pleased to announce that David Badescu and Mark Stiver's proposal on advances in information aggregation and collective intelligent research was selected and will be held this summer in Osaka, Japan, in the annual meeting of the Japanese Society for Cognitive Psychology. And a special thanks goes out to Jun Kawaguchi for making this all happen. So thank you, Jun, very much. These are just some of the programs that we've launched in the last few years to foster communication worldwide about cutting-edge issues in cognitive research. But beyond these large-scale programs, the Society is also helping individual researchers connect to cognition's global community. Just last year, the governing board created a family grants program that provides financial support to attendees who might otherwise not be able to attend. And I'm very proud to say that we're able to provide grants this year to some of the attendees at this meeting, and we plan to continue this program into the future for all of our meetings. You'll also likely see some student volunteers here. I think we have 10 volunteers at the BVB. We're going to be trying to help keep everybody on Psychonomics time, and as a thank you, we've provided these students with basically defraying their registration fees to help them meet the expenses of this meeting. For those students in the audience, we will be looking for volunteers for upcoming conferences, so think about helping us out at the next conference. Once you're back at your home institute, I invite you to explore our website, psychonomics.org, to take advantage of the many opportunities to nominate students and colleagues for awards, as well as to participate in many of our other exciting initiatives. And for example, front and center on the website is the featured blog content edited by Steve Lewandowski. And Steve and a member of our digital team are going to be at poster number 1 during all the poster sessions. So please come talk to Steve about what we're doing to advance cognition and what he's doing with his digital team. And he'll also talk to you about how to basically participate in different digital events throughout the year. Before today's keynote address by John Wixted, I'd like to please join me in thanking the scientific committee, particularly the tireless work and commitment of co-chairs, Diane Pichet and Renee Zeelenberg, who are both from Erasmus University in Rotterdam. The scientific committee put together an amazing program for everyone here, and we are absolutely grateful for them, for their contributions, and for developing a wonderful program. So please help me thank them for doing such a great job. And Diane and Renee, please come up here.
Welcome everyone to our beautiful city. John has done a better job of advertising Amsterdam than I could. Plus you're more likely to believe him because he is unbiased. I live here, so I can tell you all the great things about Amsterdam. He's a biased person. I do agree with John that we have a great conference coming up here in Amsterdam. We did some work, but actually it's up to you guys now to deliver nice talks and present great posters. We have 250 talks, about 300 posters. We have 6 very interesting looking symposia and 2 great keynote speakers, John Wixted and Dieter Kentner. I'm looking forward to the talks. If you guys have any questions during the conference about the city or about the conference itself, feel free to speak to me or Diane. We'd be happy to help you out. And with that, I give the stage back to John, and thank you all for being here.
Thank you. We just have a little thank yous for both Renee and Diane. Please step up here. I'd also like to acknowledge some other colleagues on the governing board. So for those of you on the governing board, please stand up so everybody can see who's responsible for where this society goes. These folks are making sure that this society is going to remain healthy well into the future, and they've just been wonderful to work with. So thank you very much for making all this happen. Great job. I'd also like to acknowledge our Executive Director, Lou Chamet. Please stand up, Lou. Lou's been running the organization for almost 5 years now, and I tell you, his leadership skills, energy, and vision have brought our society and cognitive psychology to the forefront of the broader field of behavior science for the media, governments, and the greater public. And I'm just so excited for the future of Psychonomics, because with Lou at the helm, we're going to continue to prosper and grow. Well, I hope you all enjoy the wonderful program, connect with your colleagues around the world, and have a chance to explore Amsterdam. I also hope you get a chance to come to this meeting in November, which is going to be held at New Orleans. And as the chair of the governing board, I feel so blessed that the 2 meetings that I reside over are in 2 of my favorite cities in the world. And I hope to see you all in New Orleans in November. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Aaron Benjamin to the podium, who's going to introduce today's keynote speaker.
Hello. It's my genuine pleasure to get to introduce John Wixted to you, and you to John Wixted. He is Distinguished Professor of Psychology at the University of California, San Diego. John, thank you for coming such a long distance to be with us here. And you probably also know him as, pound for pound, maybe the greatest memory researcher alive today. You'll see when he gets up here his size. That's actually a double compliment. John is famous for a number of things. He's active really in 4 research areas. The role of the hippocampus in memory, in particular recognition memory, computational models and understanding recognition memory behaviorally, eyewitness memory, and forgetting. And in all of these areas, he has the unique characteristic that he has come in to an area with his usual fervor, resolved debates, which most of us have not ever done, and salted the earth behind him in such a way that he's, as you know, those of you who have interacted with him, particularly if you've ever been on the other side of a debate from him, you're always wrong. And this is an objective statement. He's just always right. This is a rare characteristic, and I think you'll see some of that today when he talks about his research on recognition and on eyewitness memory. Let me end by telling you a funny anecdote he just told me, which is that when he was chair of the Psychonomic Society many moons ago, and there was a prominent keynote speaker, Ann Treisman, at our annual meeting in the United States, John did not realize that he was obliged to introduce the speaker. And so I kind of wanted to come up here and just drop the mic and walk away. But instead, I'd like to ask me to join me in welcoming John to the stage, and I hope you enjoy his talk.
Thank you. All right, thank you for that over-the-top introduction. You had to tell them that I forgot to introduce Ann Treisman, but I did. I got up and gave an impromptu introduction. It worked out okay for me. All right. Well, I'm really honored to be your speaker today, one of your keynote speakers at this conference. I attend a lot of conferences these days. I still go to operant psychology conferences and applied psychology conferences and neuroscience conferences, but Psychonomic Society I've attended almost every year of my career, and it is the best conference by far. And I think you'd agree with me. If any of you who do go to multiple conferences, I know some people who do, and they do agree with me. This is the best conference. It's the best science. And the best way to realize that is go to other conferences, and you'll see it's true. So I'm especially honored to be here for that reason. And Amsterdam is an amazing city. I've never been here, and so it's just great in every way. And my talk today on recognition memory in the laboratory in the real world was every bit it was conducted in collaboration with my former student and now professor at Royal Holloway, University of London, Laura Mickus. So I think of this as a co-authored keynote address today. And I'm not going to bore you a lot talking about the phases of my career, but I thought I would just mention a couple things. about it. So I started off, I didn't really know what I wanted to do when I got to UCSD. I'd come out of a clinical training program and had just gotten into memory, and okay, what am I going to do to become famous? And I thought, well, I'll just find the giant theories out there and I'll shoot them down, and that's how I'll become famous. And my initial goal, literally, was to shoot down Endel-Tulving's encoding specificity theory. This is a theory about how retrieval cues work, how they bring memories to conscious awareness. You've got thousands and thousands of memories in your brain right now. None of them are leaping to conscious awareness. But something happens when a retrieval cue comes along, and one memory does leap to conscious awareness. What is it about a retrieval cue that makes it work in that way, to select one memory out of the thousands that could be retrieved in 500 milliseconds? And his basic idea is that you have all these memories below conscious awareness with various features illustrated by the yellow spheres there. And then a retrieval cue comes along, and he asked, what is it about a retrieval cue that goes and grabs one of those memories and brings it to a conscious awareness? And his basic idea is that a retrieval cue is effective to the extent that its features recapitulate or overlap with the features of the encoded trace. And in this retrieval cue, it overlaps with just those features and brings it to conscious awareness. It's called pattern completion in the neuroscience literature. They just take it for granted, but it was Endel-Tulving's great insight starting in the 1960s that that's how it works. And I initially just wanted to, when I read about encoding specificity in a textbook, I thought, this is like cockamamie theory. I'm going to run some experiments and show how wrong it is. And I had a paper all written, data collected, ready to submit to JEP LMC when I then did the work of reading the literature as to why he started thinking along these lines, how people were thinking before that, realizing that actually to even ask the question was a brilliant thought. No one was asking in the 19th, everyone was focused on encoding, and no one was asking what is it about a retrieval cue that makes it work. And he realized no one's asking that question, and it's an interesting question, and he came up with this encoding specificity principle. And I began to realize this, maybe I don't want to shoot this theory down after all. And I now think of it as the single most ingenious contribution to the understanding of the psychology memory ever. It's at the top of my list. It might not be at the top of your list, but it's at the top of my list. So I literally threw that paper in the trash rather than submitted it. I rejected my own paper, and I'm so glad I did. So, okay, I love the theory. So I moved on to a different theory. And my next goal, I was going to slay a different giant. I'll shoot down signal detection theory, because people started telling me, you're doing recognition and you have to compute a D prime and all of that. And what is this signal detection theory? Wait a minute, underlying Gaussian distributions that you can't see? What if I don't believe that they're Gaussian distributions? I'm really skeptical about that. There's something, I'm going to eliminate this scourge from the earth one way or another. But I started studying why people came to think the way they did about signal detection theory, and I traced the line of thinking. And again, the same thing happened. I came to believe that it's actually psychology's greatest theoretical contribution in the world. Nothing is even a close second in my view. Again, that's just my view. That might not be your view, but that's how I came to think of it. And so this giant slayer phase of my career was not working out too well for me, because I kept falling in love with the theories that I was intending to shoot down. So I decided I need an attitude adjustment, and from then on, I decided I'm going to stand on the shoulders of giants instead. That might work better. And so who are the giants upon whose shoulders I'm standing? And here, I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Fechner, Thurstone, and John Sweats, and a whole cast of characters in the early 1950s. So just to briefly review this, so there's this really nice paper by Stephen Link in Psychological Science in 1994. It's called Rediscovering the Past, Gustav Fechner and Signal Detection Theory, where he points out that Gustav Fechner in 1860 created signal detection theory. I didn't realize that in his book, Elements of Psychophysics. Here's a quote from his paper. The origins of experimental psychology are found in a theory of discrimination created by Gustav Fechner. It was the first theory of mental judgment that applied the ideas of Gaussian error to human discrimination. Okay. So here's basically what he was doing back in 1860. So he was doing psychophysical scaling. Most of you know Fechner's law of psychophysical scaling, the logarithmic function, but I'm focusing on a different issue here. He was comparing the psychological distance between, a lightweight and a heavyweight. And this idea is ingenious in its own right. I don't know how he just ever thought of this, but if you're holding a lightweight on multiple trials, the sensation of heaviness isn't the same on every single trial. It varies from trial to trial, and he assumed, according to a Gaussian distribution, it has a mean of A, but there's variability from trial to trial. And same with the heavier weight. Even though you're holding the weight itself exactly constant, your sensation of the weight varies from trial to trial according to Gaussian distribution with a mean of B. That was his basic idea. That was ingenious thought number one. And then he had what might be the most ingenious thought, possibly, I don't know, in all of experimental psychology. He had the idea that even though we can't measure this psychological scale, we can measure this in physical space. We can put it on a scale and say this is 1 gram and this is 2 grams, but we can't really measure the sensation that these weights generate. Nevertheless, we can scale the difference in means in terms of the standard deviation of this error distribution function. That was his idea all the way back in 1860. And then people forgot about that theory, and Thurstone comes along in 1927 and rediscovers this same basic idea, same idea, except he extended it in a really interesting way. So he had the thought that whereas Fechner was dealing with objects that you could measure in physical space, you could put weights on a scale, or if you're doing line lengths, you could measure them with a ruler. That's the kind of physical stimuli he was using. Thurstone realized you could actually extend this way of thinking to stimuli that could not easily be measured on in physical space. So the beauty of handwriting, for example. How beautiful is the handwriting that you see in these two samples would be the kind of question. Now, you can't really take out your ruler or your scale and measure that very easily, but nevertheless, the same idea applies. So from trial to trial, or more likely, in his case, from person to person, how beautiful this handwriting seems has a certain mean and internal sensation. As long as it's being judged on a unidimensional scale, the same exact idea applies. And you could scale how far apart these two handwriting samples in terms of their beauty. And you could do that with attitudes, all kinds of things that you can't measure in physical space. You can still measure them in psychological space. That was Thurstone scaling. Okay. So I want to point out that they were both, although Fechner was talking about physical stimuli that you could measure in physical space, and Thurstone was talking about physical stimuli that you couldn't easily scale in physical space, they were both talking about internal sensations of physical stimuli. And so the next development in signal detection theory that I think of as being a really amazing development, and I've wondered recently who thought of it, and that's the idea that sensation can occur in the absence of stimulation, even when one of the sets of trials there's no stimulus, rather than two physical stimuli that are being compared. So the question is this: what is your sensory experience when, for example, you know that a barely perceptible tone might occur on this next upcoming trial, but no signal is actually presented? What is your perceptual experience when that happens? Well, if you have a threshold view, the simplest threshold view says that sensation doesn't occur on no signal trials. If there's no stimulation, there's no sensation. That's the intuitive idea. That's the idea that even Fechner had. But the signal detection view is that sensation does occur in the absence of stimulation, but you only notice it when you are alert to a very weak stimulus. So right now, you might not detect noise in your nervous system, but if you were in an experiment where you were having to listen to a very quiet tone and trying to decide if it occurred or not, you might come into contact with this noise distribution. So no physical stimulus. So that's a sort of a quantum leap in thinking in these terms. And I wondered who is it that came up with this idea? Because this was in addition to how people were thinking. Who thought it up? Who gets the credit? And I started asking historians, and they all had the same interesting answer. Oh, that's an interesting question. I think, I don't know, like somebody in the 1880s or somebody in the 1930s, nobody knew. And I finally realized why nobody knows, and I'll tell you in a second. But the basic idea is that you do have sensations in the absence of physical stimulation. And I think you've all had the experience of feeling your cell phone vibrate. You think you got a text message, but it didn't really. Lots of people, they do surveys, and at least undergraduates, I don't know about all of you, but undergraduates, 90% of them say they felt their phone vibrate when it didn't really vibrate. And it's because, you have your phone on vibrate like when you're in a quiet space, like in a movie theater, and you have to have everything turned down and you're expecting a text message or something. And some of you even right now, if you met a new girlfriend out on Amsterdam last night and you said, I have to go to Wixted's Keynote, and she said, well, I'll text you during the keynote and we'll go to lunch somewhere. Well, you're probably checking your phone every 5 seconds because you feel it vibrating, just hoping that that's the text message, but it isn't vibrating. And the idea is that's because you've set your decision criterion so low that you don't want to miss it. A text from somebody, and sometimes noise in the nervous system actually exceeds your decision criterion, and you feel sensations that aren't really there. So where did it come from? Well, actually, nobody really gets the credit because this idea of a noise distribution and receiver operating characteristic analysis I'll tell you about in a second, it's just an idea. These are ideas whose time had apparently come right around 1953 because a bunch of people jumped on it. As far as I can tell, the first people ever to actually plot an ROC, John Sweats says that this is the case, is these people working in electronics, so electronic signal detection and radar and sonar in 1953 in a technical report. And then in psychology, 1953 or 54, a bunch of people had this exact same idea. They were all influencing each other, and they were all thinking about how in psychophysics, we can think of trials, no signal trials, as involving sensation, even though no stimulus is presented. It's amazing if you go back and read these papers, which I only recently did, and they're all talking about it, and you can sense their excitement about this new way of thinking. So it's an advance. And as soon as you realize that there's a noise distribution, it leads to the notion of a receiver operating characteristic analysis, which is a new way of analyzing data that nobody had used before. So basically, in a signal detection model, with a criterion set there, you conceptualize a hit rate and a false alarm rate in terms of what proportion of signal and noise trials exceeds the decision criterion. So if you have 100, say, tone detection trials and you detect that quiet tone 84 out of 100 times, that's a hit rate of 84%. And if you mistakenly detect a tone 100 trials where it's not presented, but you detect it anyway, that's a false alarm rate of 16%. But the idea is that you can move that criterion around, such as that example I was just using. If you're waiting a text from a girlfriend that you met last night and you don't want to miss that, you're going to set your criterion really low, and so your hit rate's going to be 98%. But the price you'll pay is that you're going to be pulling your cell phone out every 3 seconds to see if a text came, your false alarm rate will be very high. Or you can set a more conservative standard. So for example, if I catch you doing that and I embarrass you in front of everybody, you'll say, okay, I better stop doing that. I'm going to set a higher criterion. I'm not going to check my phone so often. The danger is you might miss the text, but at least you're not going to false alarm very much. But I haven't changed your ability to tell the difference between a trial involving a tone and no tone, or a vibrating phone and no vibrating phone. That's held constant. So this distinction between response bias and discriminability was sort of born. And then they realized this new way of analyzing data. You can just plot this hit rate and false alarm rate against each other on a graph called an ROC, hit rate versus false alarm rate, and there it is, the ROC. So at the same time this idea of a noise distribution was born, the idea of ROC analysis was also born. And then you can compare two conditions. You might have a low discriminability condition and a high discriminability condition. And my point right now is that signal detection theory brought us to this way of thinking about data. Now, if you don't like signal detection theory, you can drop it. Then that form of analysis still exists, and it's used all the time. And in fact, in so many disciplines, they use ROC analysis nowadays, often not even referring to signal detection theory at all, because you really don't need it. This method of analysis is new and usually better than any other method of analysis. So in diagnostic medicine, this is how they compare diagnostic tests for diabetes, for example. If you look it up, you'll find tens of thousands of ROC analyses in the medical literature. Every medical test you ever take in your life, someone has done an ROC analysis comparing that test to a different test to see which one better discriminates people who have the disease from people who don't have the disease. And the test that generates the higher ROC is the one that does that. And it all came from psychophysicists in the 1950s and John Sweats in the 1960s explaining how ROC analysis works and what it tells you and how it's counterintuitive. It's non-intuitive, but once you think through it, you realize it's the better way to go. So yeah, that's one of the reasons why I say that signal detection theory's contribution, psychology's contribution in terms of signal detection theory is greater than any other theory that I know about. All right, and also in the early 1950s, they had this idea on signal and noise trials, you can take confidence ratings. So for example, on some trials, you might be completely sure that a stimulus did not occur. No tone sounded on this trial. I'm not only going to say it's a noise trial, I'm going to say my confidence is high that it's a noise trial. Or other trials, you might be absolutely positive that the tone occurred, so you might not just say it's a signal trial, you're going to say, not only is it a signal trial, I'm certain it's a signal trial. That might happen. But on some trials, you might not be sure. I think I heard this tone, but I'm not sure that I did. What should I say? Should I say noise or should I say signal? I'm not sure. I'm on the border. It's right by my decision criterion. I'm going to give it a 3 or a 4. If I give it a 3, it means my confidence is low. I'm saying it's a noise trial, but my confidence is low. Okay, so in signal detection theory, as many of you know, but some of you might not, that you conceptualize confidence ratings as in terms of additional decision criteria arrayed along that signal strength axis. So if on a particular tone trial you think you heard a tone, the signal strength is just strong enough to exceed your decision criterion to say it's a signal trial, you might give it a confidence rating of 4 because it doesn't exceed your confidence rating for saying 5 or 6. But on another trial, you might get a really strong sense that the tone occurred, and you might say, yeah, that's a signal trial, and I'm giving it high confidence, I'm positive. And then you can plot the ROC straight from confidence ratings. You don't have to manipulate response bias across conditions, although you can do that too. It's just a lot easier to do it this way. All right, so back in 2002, when I was forgetting to introduce Ann Treisman to her keynote address, and about that time, William Estes also gave a keynote address when I was chair of the Psychonomic Society, and back then we used to hound them to write a paper in PB&R summarizing what they said. Thank goodness we don't do that anymore to keynote speakers. But I just want to tell you what he said about, and I didn't make him say this. Over ensuing decades, the signal detection model with only technical modifications to accommodate particular applications has become almost universally accepted as a theoretical account of decision-making and research on perceptual detection and recognition, and in numerous extensions to applied domains. So I'm going to be talking about recognition and applied domains in a few minutes here. This development may well be regarded as the most towering achievement of basic psychological research of the last half of the century. And far be it from me to disagree with William Estes. I sort of see it the exact same way. So let me tell you about how it has influenced my own career after I stopped trying to reject this theory and used it to try to advance thinking about recognition memory. So this is about 10 years ago or so when we were working on, Laura Mickus and I were working on basic recognition memory problems. So I might present you with a list of words or a list of items like this. This is the study phase, you're memorizing items, you're going to get tested on it later. So you've studied some items, in this case it was images, and now I'm going to give you a recognition test. And I would say, all right, I'm about to present you with some items, and you have to tell me if it's an old item from the list or a new item that wasn't on the list. It's a signal and noise trials. So I'd put that up there, and so is that an old item or a new item? And tell me what your confidence is. And this one might generate, that doesn't seem familiar at all. That's a new item that wasn't on the list, and I'm highly confident I give this item a 1. What about that item? Well, you might remember that one from the list. That might generate a stronger memory signal that exceeds your criterion. You might give it a 5. Yeah, that's an old item. I'm pretty darn sure it was on the list, not 100% sure. And for many trials, that's what it'd be. And then you'd have data that you could plot on the ROC. And there was 2 broad theories of recognition memory that have been competing with each other for decades. One is signal detection theory that I just told you about. According to this theory that I've been describing, when you make an old decision, it means that the signal strength of that test item exceeded a decision criterion. That's one way of thinking. That's why you said it was old. But then dual process theory had a different way of thinking. According to dual process theory, in a nutshell, some old decisions are based on raw familiarity of the item, and others are based on recollection of details, like when you saw that rose, not only did it seem familiar, you remember when it popped up on the list, you were thinking that reminds me of, the dozen roses I bought my girlfriend a week ago. So you recollect, it's not just that the item is familiar, you recollect some detail from the encoding experience. There's 2 ways that you can decide that an item is old. And there was 2 camps. There was people in the signal detection camp saying, I can explain your data without assuming 2 processes, and people in the dual process camp saying, obviously you signal detection theorists are all wrong because there's 2 things, not just one. In signal detection theory, you've just got this one thing. And dual process theory, you've got recollection and familiarity. And I'm just going to give you the flavor of how we approach this rather than try to give you the details. So the essence of what we argued was that these 2 accounts, actually these 2 long-standing accounts, both have been around for a very long time in terms of recognition memory. 1958, Egan was the first one to apply the signal detection theory to recognition memory, and dual process theory sort of emerged, I would say, in the 60s is when George Mandler and others were thinking about that. And then for decades they both persisted, and they persist to this day. And our idea was they're not incompatible, actually. If you think of recollection and familiarity as both being signal detection processes, they are not the same. They're different from each other. Familiarity is a signal unto the item itself, and recollection is the retrieval of associated information. So recollection and familiarity are different, but they're both signal detection processes. Now, when you're presented with an item like this on the recognition test, you're not asked, are you experiencing recollection or familiarity? You're asked, was this item on the list or not? That's the problem you're trying to answer, and you query memory with respect to that. And since that's the question, it makes sense to use whatever mnemonic information you have to judge whether or not this item appeared on the list. Whatever familiarity the item generates and whatever recollective information that you retrieve should be combined together. If these are independent channels, independent signals, you'll do better on this old new test if you use all the information you've got to decide whether it's an old item or not. And so that was the idea that we presented. And so maybe the item generates a memory strength right here, as I said before. So it's strong enough on this memory axis, so the memory signal generated by this item is strong enough for you to say it's old with a confidence rating of 5. And then in these experiments, what we often do is once you declare it to be old, we use the remember no procedure to decide, well, was that old decision based on recollection or familiarity? That's how it works. That remember no procedure was also developed by Endel Tulving. So we've changed the question now. The question is, do you remember it? That means, do you recollect associative detail? Or do you just know it? That means you don't recollect associative detail. The item is just so familiar you know it must have appeared on a list. That's what this question means. Or are you just guessing, yes, what is it? And so now that you've changed the question, you change the way you query memory. You're not querying memory for all evidence of prior occurrence, as you were doing when the question was, is this item old or new? Now, you're trying to decide, do you recollect details? So you query memory for associative information. And you might retrieve something like, am I recollecting something about this? I think maybe when this item appeared on the list, I was thinking about all the bicycles they're all riding around Amsterdam. I think I thought that when this item was presented, but I'm not getting a super strong memory signal. So you're getting some recollection signal, but not quite strong enough for you to declare that you're recollecting this item. And so the key feature of this recollection idea of recognition memory, it's just like the noise distribution in sensation and perception. It seems strange to talk about recollecting information for, this item was not on the list, by the way. And I'm talking about items that weren't on the list generating a recollection signal, which seems weird. It sounds like sensation in the absence of stimulation. And that's the essence of a signal detection model. That idea is that when you query your brain for any slight evidence of recollection, that your brain is going to return a signal, a noise recollection signal. That you're sometimes going to have false memories that exceed your criterion. In this example, it didn't happen. You say, I don't recollect it. And then you query memory along a different dimension, because now you're asking yourself, do I just know that is this item so familiar that I just know it appeared on the list? And yeah, it's generating a really strong signal, and I'm saying I just know it. It exceeds my criterion for saying that I know it. That's the essence of this model. But what I love about this model is that it doesn't declare long-standing camps to be wrong. It doesn't necessarily do that. It says, yeah, there's a distinction between the signal generated by this item unto itself, how familiar that seems even if you can't recollect anything else about it, versus associative information that you might also recollect. All it says is, yeah, dual process theory exists. They're both signal detection processes, and you can combine them into a single memory strength variable when the question asks you, is it old or new? So it reconciles these two long-standing views. And so that's basic research. That's the kind of research I did all my career. It's curiosity-driven. It's not intended to solve any social problem, and its importance is sometimes hard to explain to people, including my wife. So when I was working on this, I would come home. I was so really excited about this way of thinking. It made so much sense to me, and I would argue that the data are consistent with it. And I would rush home and tell her, explain to her, yeah, these recollection and familiarity, they're just both continuous signal detection processes. Why didn't anybody think about that before? Look, I can draw it out for you, and here's the signal. This is a decision criterion. I was so excited I couldn't sleep at night. And she looked very bored. And she asked me the most honest question, which is, how does this help people? And I was like, it doesn't help people. What do you mean, how does it help people? It's interesting, it's fascinating, I love it, that's why I do it. Maybe I'm a horrible monster that I'm not trying to help anybody, but it's super interesting. Yeah, that really happened. But sometimes accidentally, when the basic research you're doing is basic training for what you do later in your career. And so then that's what happened next. So Roddy Roediger got me into eyewitness identification. He just got elected to the National Academy in the US. And he was invited to write this chapter in this book called Memory and Law in 2012, edited by Lynn Nadell and his colleagues. He was invited to write a chapter on, confidence in the legal setting. And he contacted me and said, John, I know you think a lot about confidence. I want you to write this chapter with me. And I said, that is not going to happen, Roddy. You're going into that. I like the lab where everything's clean and controllable. You can go do your chapter on your own. Thank you very much. But Roddy persisted. He wouldn't take no for an answer. So I finally said, all right, I'll write this chapter with you. And I started reading the eyewitness identification literature, and that's when I realized for the first time what a gigantic chasm there is between basic researchers who study recognition memory and applied researchers who study recognition memory. Somehow, these two fields have gotten so completely separated, so separated that neither one wants to talk much about what the other one is doing, and they don't know much about what the other one is doing. Incredibly separated. I sort of knew they were separated, but how much they were separated, I didn't know. Now, applied research, unlike the research that I was just describing, which was I would characterize as curiosity-driven, applied research is problem-driven. It's working on solving a social problem. And the problem that, in the case of eyewitness identification, that they were focused on is wrongful convictions. And so you might know, since the 1990s, the Innocence Project has used DNA testing to overturn more than 350 wrongful convictions of the innocent. And when you look back at what went wrong, well, one thing stands out. Here's a chart from their Innocence Project website where they looked at the first 325 cases, the contributing causes of wrongful convictions. It's things like false confessions, improper forensics. But what stands out in 72% of the cases is eyewitness misidentification. A witness got on that stand and said, that's the guy who did it. I'm positive that's the guy who did it. The jury heard that. They convicted him. 14 years after they're in prison, on average, they do DNA testing and find out that the guy's innocent. Eyewitness memory seems unreliable. And that's the problem to be fixed. And so one way of addressing it is to focus on the eyewitness identification procedures that lead to eyewitness misidentification. So let me tell you about a standard six-pack photo lineup that they use in the US. So a six-pack photo lineup has one suspect who's either innocent or guilty. This is the guy. So you report, some white guy, clean-shaven white guy, short dark hair, about 20 years old, stole my purse. And the police come and say, all right, they take your report, they got the description. They think, well, this guy who lives in this neighborhood who we think might be the guy who did it because he's done this kind of stuff in the past. So let's take his photo and put it in a lineup, and we'll show it to the witness, and we'll see if this is the guy who did the crime. That's sort of how they do it. They have a guy who they think might have done the crime, but they're not sure, and they're going to show it to the witness to find out. But to make it a fair test, they surround him with fillers who match the description, same description, but they're all known to be innocent. So these might be, easiest way to think about it is these are, the crime occurred in San Diego, and these are photos downloaded from prisons in Kentucky and Florida and stuff like that. So these guys are already in prison. They didn't steal your purse yesterday, but we're going to, make sure it's a fair test by putting them in a lineup, and we'll see if the witness picks the suspect, okay? And they show it to the witness, and the witness can do one of three things. Identify the suspect, in which case that guy's imperiled. He could end up going to prison because the witness identified him, or the witness can, that's the most important event, the witness can identify a filler, in which case nothing happens to the filler because the police already know that filler's not guilty. They just think the eyewitness, either they have the wrong guy or the eyewitness doesn't have a good memory of the right guy, or the witness can reject the lineup. And I'm going to focus on when they identify the suspect because that's when the action happens. I'm going to focus on them because the legal system focuses on them. They get selected off to testify against that guy. And we want to know about these witnesses. So just to make that clear, because it sometimes seems odd to people that we focus on the suspect IDs so much, unless we're fitting a psychological model, in which case we fit all the data. But when we're looking at applied implications, we focus on suspect IDs. So imagine all these stick figures are eyewitnesses to different crimes who are presented with different lineups, and some subset of them land on the suspect. And that's what the gold stick figures are. Those are the ones who landed on the suspect. And the legal system siphons those people off and puts them on the stand to testify against somebody who often turns out to be innocent. We want to know about these people. How can we make it so that more of these people are picking the guilty guy, not the innocent guy? And what's the relationship between confidence and accuracy for these people when they're testifying? So, all right. One way of reducing misidentifications is a sequential lineup. Everything's the same, but you present the photos sequentially. That's an idea that went out there in 1985. And to study which is better, a simultaneous lineup or a sequential lineup, mock crime laboratory studies are performed. These aren't real crimes, these are mock crimes. So an example, each participant, such as 200 people, might watch a simulated crime presented under ideal conditions. So you're an undergraduate, you're just sitting at a computer monitor, you're going to watch a video of a crime. I'll show you one in a second. It's followed by a photo lineup memory test, just like you're a real witness, except for it's all pretend. And so here's a video. I just found this on YouTube, so I'll use it as an example. It's just like the videos we show and that other show. You're a subject in this experiment. You're watching this video. You're watching a crime. Getting a good look at his face, maybe. He commits the crime. And he's out of there. Okay, you just witnessed a crime, and now we're going to test your memory, and here's how we do it. Half the people randomly assigned to the target present condition, where the guy that you just saw commit a crime in some video is in this photo lineup. This isn't the guy who was in that video I just showed you, but imagine I showed you a video of him committing a crime, and now you're seeing this one. That's a target present lineup. And then the other half are assigned to a target absent lineup. Oh, so let me just say, maybe the data would show that of the 100 people assigned to the target present lineup, 58 might pick him. You want that number to be as high as possible, right? You want witnesses to get the guilty guy. That would be a good thing, get guilty guys off the street. Let's say 58 out of 100 pick the guilty guy correctly, the guy that they saw commit a crime in the video, and the rest either picked a filler or rejected the lineup. But for 58 witnesses, they picked the suspect. And in the target absent lineup condition, the other 100 participants are assigned to that. We've replaced the guilty guy's photo with a photo of a different guy. And in this case, I picked a guy who kind of looks like him, because they do that sometimes in these experiments to like lure a lot of false IDs, so then they can try to figure out how to reduce false IDs. And so imagine, because we picked such a lookalike, that 43 out of 100 pick him mistakenly. These are the sorts of things, the kind of IDs we want to minimize. We want to maximize the hit rate, minimize the false alarm rate. That's the goal. Right now, there's a lot of false IDs. Okay. And by the way, if you're, this is so different from cognitive psychology, where you test each subject 100 times with lots of different stimuli and get a D prime for that subject. In these experiments, you test each person one time only, often with one set of stimuli, but it doesn't really change the theoretical conceptualization, just changes the sources of variance. All right. Well, in the first study on this, the correct ID rate and false ID rate for suspect IDs was what I just showed you. Correct ID rate of 0.58 and a false ID rate of 0.43. Not very good. And when they did it sequentially, they got a correct ID rate of 0.50 and a false ID rate of 0.17, a dramatic reduction in the false ID rate. And remember, this is problem-driven research focused on solving the problem of false identifications. That's the whole idea. Is a direct hit on that. The correct ID rate went down. It would have been better if it went up. It went down. It was non-significant, but it went down a little bit. And most of you, except for those of you who've heard this story before, everyone who hasn't heard this story before, every single one of you would agree with me that this is a sequential superiority effect. That is, we have too many false identifications. Most people would agree that this massive reduction in false identifications is definitely worth it compared to the small price we have to pay in the reduction in correct identifications. Almost everybody would agree with that. And you can see why police departments in the US started switching over to the sequential procedure, given the problem of eyewitness misidentification and this big reduction in the false ID rate. You can see it. You'll all agree with me on that. I know I've done it too many times. I always convince everybody in the audience that sequential lineups are better. I dare anybody to argue with me. I tell them I'll be polite. I just want to hear the argument. Why isn't a sequential lineup better? And then I explain to them why, because it's not intuitive. That's the thing about signal detection theory. It's a thinking tool. I feel like, I've had this secret that I haven't told anybody all these years. I'm not that smart, but signal detection theory has added like 15 IQ points to my brain, basically, and I get to act like I'm smarter than I really am, because this really isn't a sequential superiority effect. Now, your mind is trapped by these data. It's trapped by your thinking that that this is your choice. It's either this or this, and certainly this looks a lot better than this, and if that's my choice, I'm going with this, and if that were my choice, I would go with that too. I'd pick the sequential. It's not the choice. That's the key. That isn't your choice. Well, anyway, if it were your choice, you'd have to compute some dependent measure. They usually compute the diagnosticity ratio. That's just the measure. But its problem basically is that it's focused on these being the choices. And now, I've already explained to you how there's many more choices than this. I'm just going to explain it again. So I've just plotted these data on an ROC. That's the simultaneous lineup correct ID rate and false ID rate. Correct ID rate of 0.58, false ID rate of 0.43. I've just plotted it. That's all I've done. It's the exact same data in both cases. I haven't done anything else. exact same data, plotted on an ROC. This is a better way of looking at the data because it's less likely to trap your mind into thinking that these are the only two alternatives. All of a sudden, there's a lot of white space in there that would be nice to fill it up with data points and see what the possibilities actually are. And there's many other possibilities. So let's imagine, instead of just these two conditions, these two between subject conditions, I add a third condition where I use a simultaneous lineup and I use instructions to induce a more conservative response bias. So everything's the same. You watch a video, you're about to get a simultaneous lineup, target present or target absent. I say to you, oh, by the way, don't make an ID if it's a guess. We don't want any guesses. And since some of the correct IDs would have been guesses and some of the false ID rates would have been guesses, this will lower the correct and false ID rate for the simultaneous procedure. I'll get another point on the ROC if I do that. And then I can run more simultaneous groups, every time inducing more conservative responding and get more points on the ROC. Until finally this last point would be the group where I say, okay, you just watched this video, here's a lineup, don't make an ID unless you're 100% certain of being correct. So certain that you testify in a court of law in a life or death situation. Otherwise, don't make an ID. Be that certain. And that's going to lower the correct and false ID rate to some value like that. So these are hypothetical data. See, you're not constrained to a point, you're constrained to a curve. This is the diagonal line of chance performance. You're trying to get as far away from that line of chance performance as you can, just like in medicine. They want the diagnostic test that gets as far away from that diagonal line as they can because the farther away you are from that diagonal line, in medicine, the better you can distinguish between people who have the disease and people who don't. In this case, the farther away you are from that line, the better eyewitnesses can distinguish between innocent and guilty suspects. Okay, that's the basic idea. But it could be that if I manipulated response bias for the sequential procedure, I'll find that they all just fall on the same curve. And this is what equal discriminability would look like. And I started with the real data, and I've just added hypothetical data. See, there's no trick to lowering the false ID rate. That's actually extremely easy. You can lower it as much as you want. That's the easy part. The hard part is getting on a higher ROC. So maybe but these are the only data we have, right? This is the data that I convinced you suggests a sequential lineup superiority effect. But let me show you what such a superiority effect would look like. The sequential procedure would be better if I ran this experiment and got data like that. This is what a sequential superiority effect looks like. If you're on a higher ROC, it's objectively superior. Why? Because for any given correct ID rate, such as 0.50, the sequential procedure would have a lower false ID rate. Or I can think about it another way. For any given false ID rate, like 0.17, I could have a higher correct ID rate for the sequential procedure. That's what a sequential superiority effect would look like. And around 2012 is when Laura and I started making this argument. And it went over like a lead balloon when we first started saying this, because it was so foreign to people who were studying this sort of thing. The question is, what do the empirical data say about simultaneous and sequential lineup ROCs? That was the question. So the first one we ran, we got a significant simultaneous superiority effect. We ran 600 subjects in this that we thought was a high-powered study, but actually it turns out that's a pretty low-powered study in retrospect, and it was a barely significant effect. So nowadays, we wouldn't argue too strongly in favor of a simultaneous superiority effect based on this one result. But nevertheless, it's pretty compelling evidence against a sequential superiority effect. And then Gronlund and his colleagues reanalyzed some of the data that they'd previously published, and they too saw no evidence of a sequential superiority effect, and if anything, simultaneous but superiority effect, not significantly. And then DeBolia and Dodson, 2013, published a much higher powered study, much more, two different conditions, simultaneous lineup beat out the sequential lineup, another condition, the simultaneous lineup beat out the sequential lineup. Highly significant results. And then in 2014, Carlson and Carlson, with more than 2,000 subjects, a simultaneous superiority effect. So over and over again, it seems like actually it's the simultaneous lineup that had the significant discriminability, something we did not see coming. Nobody had ever had that thought. We didn't have that thought. It surprised us. So before ROC analysis, U.S. police departments were changing their ways. In 2006, the International Association of Chiefs of Police recommended that the sequential procedure be used in preference to the simultaneous procedure. So the police don't read journal articles, but they do listen to this IACP. And about 5,000, in the US we have like 15, 16, 17,000 individual police departments. The police chiefs all make their own individual decisions about which lineup they want to use. And 5,000 of them had decided to switch to sequential. But that trend's over now. In 2016, the IACP dropped their longstanding recommendation in favor of the sequential procedure. And in 2017, then US Deputy Attorney General Sally Yates delivered a similar message to all US attorneys and federal law enforcement agencies saying that the data don't support a sequential superiority effect. And this is amazing, because we were trying to convince scientists, not anybody in the real world, but somehow it actually filtered into policy really quickly, much more quickly than we expected, despite no intentional effort on our part. So that's where it stands right now. I think going forward, eventually, they'll be recommending the simultaneous procedure over the sequential procedure, but it hasn't gotten that far yet. All right, so that's, to me, I think of it as another example of what signal detection theory does when it enters a new field. It gives you a new perspective on how to think about things and a better way of analyzing the data to answer the question you want. All right, so that was ROC analysis, but I want to tell you about a different analysis, confidence accuracy characters analysis, and it's the difference between the two is in this paper by Mikus in 2015 in JARMIC. I actually think it's maybe like the most important paper in the eyewitness identification literature, this distinction, what ROC analysis answers and what it doesn't answer is an important consideration. So ROC analysis is for policymakers. All else equal, policymakers should choose a procedure that maximizes the ability of eyewitnesses to discriminate between innocent and guilty suspects in just the exact same way that they choose the diagnostic test in medicine that discriminates between the two relevant states of the world. That's what ROC analysis is for, policymakers. But a judge and a jury, they're not policymakers. They're, at the end of the chain. The ID already happened 6 months ago. The witness is sitting in court, and they're trying to ask, how reliable is that ID that you made from that lineup 6 months ago? How informative is eyewitness confidence? These are different questions. And ROC analysis doesn't answer those questions. A different analysis, CAC analysis, does that. It's just like, for those of you who know what positive predictive value is, PPV in diagnostic medicine, it's just PPV for the equal base rate situations. That's what CAC analysis is, for those of you who know about that. But let me just talk about now a different story about the relationship between confidence and accuracy. You all think that eyewitnesses are unreliable and the relationship between confidence and accuracy is weak. Not only that, you teach it in your classes. You do that because every textbook says so, just like they all say the sequential lineup is better than the simultaneous lineup. But to talk about this question, you have to draw a distinction between two identifications. Identification number one that occurs shortly after the crime from a lineup, and identification number two that occurs months later in a court of law. This memory test is like performing a DNA test on a contaminated sample. Elizabeth Loftus, more than anyone, has taught us that you can contaminate memory. We didn't know that before she came along. Now we know that. It's just like other forensic evidence. It can be contaminated. It's her brilliant contribution to our understanding of memory that nobody had before. And then, so I'm going to talk about the reliability of eyewitness memory on the uncontaminated test, the initial test, because that's how you talk about all other forensic evidence when you're judging how reliable is fingerprint evidence or DNA evidence. You're not saying, how reliable is it if I contaminate it and then do the test? Because you already know it's not going to be reliable if you do that. How reliable is it when we don't contaminate it? That's the question. And Gary Wells has spent a career figuring out how to do a lineup properly. Only one suspect in a lineup has to be a fair lineup, everybody description match. So now we know how to properly test memory. Okay, so it's time to revisit the question, how reliable is eyewitness memory on an initial properly performed test? Uncontaminated, properly performed, that's the question. For many years, eyewitness identification researchers concluded, and the world came to understand, that even on an initial uncontaminated memory test, eyewitness IDs are error-prone and eyewitness confidence does not inform accuracy. You might have heard the phrase, the confidence-accuracy correlation is weak. You might even believe that. You might even teach it. So let's go back to this lineup where we have a guilty suspect and an innocent suspect. People who pick that guy, we're going to code it a 1. People who pick that guy, we're going to code it a 0. 1 means correct, 0 means incorrect. Because we're interested in the relationship between confidence and accuracy. When they pick those guys, we get confidence on some scale, let's say a 5-point scale. So for every subject who picks a suspect, and again, I'm limiting my analysis to those people. It doesn't change much if we expand it, but let's just limit the analysis to people who land on a suspect, the witnesses who imperil somebody. Well, for every subject who lands on a suspect, you have data that look like this. Let's say the first 10 subjects, you have a accuracy score, it's a 0 or 1, and you have the confidence that they provided, all right? And when you want to know the relationship between two things, that's accuracy, that's confidence, what do? You run computer correlation coefficient between those two columns of numbers. It's called the point biserial correlation because this is a dichotomous variable, but it's just the standard correlational formula. You use computer correlation to ask what's the relationship between confidence and accuracy. And for some questions, that's the right statistic. If you want to know the relationship between an SAT score and a college GPA, you'd have, for every student, you'd have two numbers. You could run a correlation coefficient. That would be the right statistic to answer that question. It's the wrong statistic to answer this question. Anyway, for many years, they computed the correlation coefficient. 0 means no correlation, 1 means perfect correlation. So 0.38 is similar to a number that comes up often. It doesn't look that impressive. Okay, but here's what you're doing. So when you compute a correlation coefficient. So each dot is an individual subject. They have a 0 or 1 for accuracy. They've expressed some confidence. And what you're doing when you compute a correlation coefficient is you're fitting a straight line to those data. That's not really telling you very much because, if you're giving a confidence rating of 1, you ought to be 50-50. And this line has to bisect. You can't perfectly, even if confidence and accuracy are perfectly related, this measure doesn't give it to you. So what you want to know is when somebody expresses high confidence, how accurate are they? And in this example, they're 100% correct. 5, these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, these 5 people were all accurate. And when they give low confidence, how likely are they to be correct? Well, random chance. And that's how it's supposed to be. When you give high confidence, you're supposed to be accurate, and low confidence means I'm not sure, I'm probably making a mistake, and everything in between. So what you want to plot, and this is confidence accuracy characteristic analysis that Laura described in her 2015 paper, this is what you want to plot. Confidence against accuracy. Remember, this is all hypothetical data, but this is 100% when you give a 5. See, that's what I have plotted here, 1.0 for 5s, 50% when you express low confidence. This is what you want to know. You don't want to know that. Telling a judge that the point biserial correlation coefficient is 0.38 is telling that judge nothing that they can understand. Telling them this is telling them something. It's what they want to know, and they can understand it. It has both of those features. That's confidence accuracy characteristic analysis. It's a much better way to analyze the data. And by the way, the problems with point biserial correlation were noted by Jaslin and colleagues back in 1996, but it's taken a long time for the field to realize that this is a better way to analyze the data. So this paper by Gary Wells and I in PSPI just last year, we reviewed the literature. There's nothing wrong with the studies that were performed. The problem was how the data were analyzed. We analyzed the data in the way I just described. When you picked a suspect and you landed on the suspect and expressed a certain level of confidence, how likely were you to be correct? Well, if you expressed high confidence, you're highly accurate. This is real data. Low confidence, low accuracy. And this is the first review of the literature since 1995 when Spohr et al. Reviewed the literature on the point biserial correlation coefficient. We argue this is what you want to know. And the relationship between confidence and accuracy is very strong, is our argument. All the data show it. That's not a picture of unreliable eyewitness memory, especially if they express high confidence. This is a take-home story based on lab studies. Are confidence and accuracy related in the real world on this first ID from a fair lineup? That's the question. And so we have this paper in PNAS in 2016 with Laura, John Dunn, Steve Clark, and a guy named William Wells. In 2013, eyewitnesses from 348 investigations in the Houston Police Department participated in an actual field experiment. Real eyewitnesses all received fair double-blind photo lineups, and the suspects in the lineup were strangers. This is really important. Fair, double-blind photo lineups involving strangers. What that means is when a witness is looking at a lineup, the only way to land on a suspect at greater than chance accuracy is through a memory match signal, right? That's the only way they can do it. The officer can't steer them to the suspect. There's no way to, it's a fair lineup. The guy doesn't stand out. They're independently assessed by non-witnesses for fairness. So it has to be through a memory match signal. And then in the only study ever conducted with real eyewitnesses using fair lineups, double-blind lineups, we ask for confidence, low, medium, or high. People don't do that usually because everybody thinks confidence doesn't tell you anything. And here's our estimated suspect ID accuracy. You have to estimate it because you don't know in a real lineup if the suspect is innocent or guilty, unlike in a mock crime study. It has to be estimated. But it's not as hard as you think. Any way of estimating the data will come to results that look just like the lab data will look like this. So just to give you the flavor, so if If when eyewitnesses express high confidence, they're just responding randomly, which is kind of how people think about eyewitness memory for the most part, not far from that, well, there would be, for those high confidence IDs, there would be 5 times as many filler IDs as suspect IDs, right? Because there's 5 times as many fillers as suspects. So if you're responding randomly and expressing high confidence, you're going to see a lot of high confidence filler IDs and a few high confidence suspect IDs. And in fact, that is what you see when they express low confidence. They're telling you their confidence is low. They're basically telling you they're randomly responding, and they are. About 5 out of 6 low confidence IDs from a lineup, suspect or filler, land on a filler, 5 out of 6. But almost all high confidence suspect IDs land on a suspect. And when the only way to get there is through a memory match signal, it has to be accuracy is high. Anyway, we estimate low confidence accuracy to be low and high confidence accuracy to be very high, just like the lab data. And this is analysis I just did. We didn't publish this, but using the same methods, we use response latency to analyze accuracy, because latency and confidence go together. They're highly correlated. They're not completely redundant. But when you do the analysis, it shows again, if it takes more than 30 seconds to make an ID, if you're sitting there for 30 seconds looking at the lineup and you haven't decided yet, when you finally do decide, it's not very accurate. But if you decide very quickly within 5 seconds, it's highly accurate. So, and this is important because lots of times you don't have confidence. You know, the police records will say something like, witness immediately identified the suspect. That gives you some clue that it was a high confidence ID based on latency. Okay, what we're saying is that the message that's been sent to the legal system for a long time, which is ignore eyewitness confidence, is a terrible message. We're saying pay very close attention to eyewitness confidence because it's giving you so much information. So let me show you a real eyewitness identification for a case I was involved in recently. This is an actual police officer giving a simultaneous photo lineup to a witness, and you're going to have to decide if it's a high confidence or low confidence ID. Now, I'm a highly trained expert and you're a bunch of rank amateurs, but I'll help you, okay? We're trying to decide if this is a high confidence ID or a low confidence ID. This is a case where they identified the suspect and they prosecuted that suspect based on eyewitness identification information, okay? Which might not be a bad thing if it's made with high confidence, but is a bad thing if it's made with low confidence. So you want to know. Ready? So try. No, it won't be easy. Do your best.
Yes, so if you can, just take a look at all the photos that I'm going to show you. They're all together one page. And then you let me know.
She's the police officer.
The person in question. Okay. So those are the photos.
9-person simultaneous photo lineup.
More closer as you want.
Get your stopwatch out. Listen to the first thing he says. That's the first thing he says. Remember, they prosecute the guy he eventually lands on.
All right, well, I can at least definitely say no to some of these people. I mean, definitely not the top row.
He's ruling out people, isn't it?
Definitely not this dude. This dude. Yeah, definitely not him.
So you're looking at numbers on top. You say the first 3, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, I definitely.
4 and 5. That's what you're pointing to.
As.
Definitely no.
Yeah.
So 1 through 5, definitely no.
1 through 4, definitely no.
Okay.
5, I'm pretty sure no.
Okay.
8, no. The ones I'm trying to decide between are these two.
Okay, we're about 2 minutes into this line of proceeding. When they sent me this, I start laughing at about this point. This guy goes on for 10 minutes dickering and debating about who it might be. Finally says, if these two people had a baby, it would look like, the guy I remember. And then he finally says, okay, I think it's this guy. And does land on the suspect. Police officer write down, witness positively identified, number 9, suspect. They prosecute the guy. Incredibly, this is the lowest confidence ID I've ever seen in my entire life. And they're prosecuting this guy. This is really important. It's so much more important than it seems. And, in this case, I flew all the way to Washington, D.C. I testified. I explained to them exactly what I'm explaining to you, and they didn't take that ID seriously, fortunately. This was an inconclusive test result. This is the most important thing I'm saying today. That was an inconclusive test result. Now, let me talk about forensic DNA evidence. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to speed up here. DNA is thought to be reliable. I got this quote. I sort of agree with it. DNA, and most people do, DNA is the most accurate forensic science we have. It has exonerated scores of people convicted based on more flawed disciplines like hair or bite mark analysis or eyewitness evidence, I could add. And there have been few publicized cases of DNA mistakenly implicating someone in a crime. So let's talk about how they use DNA evidence. So a crime is committed, a suspect's detained. So the police say, okay, you were arguing with the murder victim this morning and you threatened him, we think you did it. You're our suspect. They cordon off the crime scene before they do forensic analysis. Now, why do they do that? To keep it from getting contaminated. Then they collect evidence from the crime scene. Maybe they get the murder weapon and they test DNA on that murder weapon or fingerprints, and they decide, well, does this DNA profile match the suspect? They get a saliva sample from the suspect, they compare the two profiles, and it's not a match. Well, if it's not a match, it rules out that guy and they search for a new suspect. But let's say it's a match. A conclusive match. Well, they already thought it was this guy. I saw you arguing with the victim. You threatened the victim. 2 hours later, he's dead. Your DNA is all over the murder weapon. We're prosecuting you, and you're going to prison because the jury is going to convict you. But what do they do if they get an inconclusive test result from the forensic evidence? What do? Well, the test result comes back to the prosecutor, and it says inconclusive. And so they further investigate the suspect. It doesn't rule him out. They don't let him go necessarily, but they don't convict him. But let's say they did. Let's say this is what they did. The test result comes back inconclusive, and they prosecute him anyway. And then they just throw that test result out. They say to the suspect, excuse me, can you put your hand all over the murder weapon? Thank you very much for getting your DNA all over it. And now they've contaminated the gun. And now at trial, they test the DNA profile from the gun again. And it's a conclusive match this time. And they tell that to the jury. And the jury convicts the guy reasonably enough. And then the Innocence Project comes along and says, you guys have been doing this for a year. We keep finding video of what actually happened at the crime, and these guys are innocent. DNA evidence is unreliable. Well, that wouldn't be my conclusion. I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with DNA evidence. It's pointing the finger of blame in the wrong direction. It's not going to fix the problem by just throwing your hands up and saying DNA evidence is unreliable. Actually, the DNA test was just fine. It said it was an inconclusive test result. Sometimes a fingerprint is smudgy, the DNA sample is incomplete. Sometimes forensic, you just got to live with the fact that the evidence isn't there. The problem is this part. and the conclusion would be DNA evidence is fine, stop doing this, legal system. And this is exactly what they do with eyewitness evidence. You got a suspect, they show a lineup, the suspect makes an inconclusive ID like the one I showed you. It's inconclusive, but they prosecute him anyway, which they did in that case that I just showed you. They totally forget about that. Then they contaminate the brain of the eyewitness with the trace of the suspect, and then they run the test again at trial, and it's conclusive this time. She says, I'm positive that that's the guy who did it because, you know, she's seen his picture repeatedly, and they've told her she's done a great job, and we knew this was the guy who did it. And the jury convicts reasonably enough, and it turns out that we keep convicting innocent people. Now, see, the thing is, it's rare. Standard signal detection model, it should be rare that you, on an uncontaminated test, that you make a high confidence old decision, that from this initial lineup, you confidently identify the wrong guy. That should be rare, and that is true. The problem is not that eyewitnesses are unreliable on the initial test. The problem is that the legal system ignores the inconclusive test results just for eyewitness evidence, but not for DNA evidence or fingerprint evidence, and then they say there's something wrong with eyewitness evidence. So here's the thing. Almost nobody knows this. Brennan Garrett, a law professor at University of Virginia, obtained court and police records for 161 DNA exoneration cases involving eyewitness misidentification. And for 57% of those cases, the record indicated how confident the eyewitness was on the initial ID. So we can look, well, what did they do on that initial ID? Everything I told you is there shouldn't be very many high confident errors. Maybe there's going to be some. Eyewitness memory is not perfect. But in every single one of those cases, the eyewitness was uncertain about his or her identification. The test result came back inconclusive. And now you're done. And if the legal system understood that, none of those eyewitnesses would have put anybody in prison. In fact, it isn't the eyewitnesses who put people in prison. The eyewitnesses feel like they did. They feel guilty. Everybody says, I feel so bad for you. Don't feel bad. Eyewitness memory is just terrible. You know, but actually, it's not the eyewitnesses' fault. It's time to totally exonerate the eyewitnesses. They returned an inconclusive test result, and then the legal system ignored it. It's the legal system that deserves the blame, not the eyewitnesses. The wrongful convictions occurred not because of unreliable eyewitnesses, but because the inconclusive nature of the initial IDs was ignored. So, anyway, sometimes basic research is, I got to conclude, is basic training for applied research. That was true in my case. ROC analysis, just to summarize, shows that sequential lineups are not diagnostically superior to simultaneous lineups. If anything, it's the other way around. And CAC analysis shows that eyewitness memory is reliable when it is not contaminated, first test early in the investigation. Proper procedures are followed, and most important of all, the conclusiveness of the test result is not ignored. None of those guys would have gone to prison. The eyewitnesses would not have put anybody in prison if they had not ignored the inconclusive nature of the one test result you get. So I said basic research is curiosity driven. It's not intended to solve any social problem. It's basically writing the encyclopedia of knowledge. We used to actually have an encyclopedia of knowledge back when they were in books. That's what we're all doing when we're doing our research. It's foundational work, and solving social problems requires that foundation. That's what didn't happen in the case of eyewitness identification. But God's little trick is this. You can't know in advance exactly which line of basic research you'll need to solve that social problem when it comes along. Instead, you'll have to find the information you need by looking it up in the encyclopedia of knowledge to help you solve it. And it's in that sense, basic research is applied research. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Thank you very much.